Hi, I'm Christie Bemis, and I am your host for Authentic AF Conversations with People in the Ignite Your Life classroom with Christie Bemis. And I'm here as a psychotherapist, a sex educator, and a relationship expert. My true passion in life is to guide you to have deeper connections, stronger ways of communicating with each other, and more intimacy in your life. And each of my guest speakers are here because they feel as passionate about their topic to enhance your relationships as I do. So, welcome. Sit back, grab a journal, grab a pen, because this isn't your normal podcast. This is not just a sit and get. This is a classroom to enhance your experience. There'll be journaling prompts, guided experiences, questions to ponder, and more. So, welcome to Authentic AF Conversations. Hello and welcome. Like I said, I'm Christie Bemis, and I'm here having authentic communication and conversations with people that I think are really doing some amazing work out there in the world. So I'm here with Donald Bialkowski. Am I saying your name right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Wow, good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Welcome to Authentic AF show today. And I'm so glad that you were willing to join me. And I'm going to share a little bit about you, but I really want you to share a little bit more about your story and anything I might miss. So, how I ran across Donald, do you go by Don or Donald?
Donald, I prefer. Thank you.
Okay. How I
Yep.
ran across Donald is he was doing a men's march, and I am raising a man and I'm in relationship with a man, and this was really exciting for me to see men coming together and really supporting one another. So I started doing a little bit more digging and found out that he was also a therapist within the greater Madison community that I'm in and doing similar work, mostly with men. I work mostly with women and couples. You work with men and couples, and doing what's called relational life therapy, which is really, for me, it was profoundly changing in my relationship, healed a lot of things I hadn't looked at before,
Mhm.
and really was a new way, not just to do my relationship, but to also help and support couples doing their relationships together. So that was really exciting to find somebody that I could maybe collaborate with and maybe refer some of the men that were looking for deeper work, or couples that were looking for work as well. So, welcome. And what else did I miss? What else do you want to share about the work you're doing and who you are as a therapist
Mm.
and a person?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, thank you for that, and thanks for having me. I always love having conversations about relationships. I say this to the folks that I work with a lot. People who do relationships will all talk about their relationship, and so this is an extension of that, and talking about our relationships. And yeah, I just think it's such a important, fruitful discussion. So thank you for having me.
Mhm.
What let's see. Just to start with relational life therapy, I think that's a piece that kind of connects us. I often say that relational life therapy found me.
Mhm.
I've been married 20 years, a little more than 20 years, and my marriage went through a hard spell, as all marriages do, to different degrees, but went through a hard spell right around the pandemic, so 6 years ago or so. And as a part of that healing recovery work, my wife and I found relational life therapy. We actually did this Terry Reel's work, and he
Mhm.
has different courses that are online. And one of those courses is called The Art of Relationship. The Art of Relationship, I believe that's what it's called. But it's 18 sessions, and my wife and I would walk together and listen to a session and then kind of reflect on how that looked or felt like our relationship, or just seeing other people was so powerful. And so that was sort of how I got, just like personally was involved in the benefit and the perspectives of relational life therapy. And then also, because I do this work, I've been in mental health for 20 years in different spaces like corrections and healthcare. I've been community mental health. Uh, and most recently I'm in private practice. But yeah, I just sort of I was feeling the benefits of relational life therapy and the concepts and the skills applied to my own marriage. And despite trying to avoid doing couples work for most of my career, it was like, oh well, why wouldn't I start doing this work with the men that I was working with? And then
Right.
that sort of just like opened up to, well, now let's bring in your partner, and now we're doing relational life therapy. And I've continued to study and get certified and continue to stay connected to the community.
Yeah.
So I love the model. We could do an all day 8 hour
I
long
know. Yeah.
talk around relational life therapy, but I'll just stop right there because that was
I
kind of a
love
lot.
your story is very similar to mine. My partner and I, found ourselves in a couple of years into the relationship struggling with the same things that happened in a previous relationship
mm,
and now is being played out with each other. And we stumbled across really Terry Real's book Us, and listened
mhm.
to it on car trips and things like that. So very similar of, oh wow. And then as it started changing and shifting our relationship, and I've worked with couples for 20 years, but never like this. So it was really unique and profoundly transformational. Whether couples that I work with choose to stay or to end things with each other, but end it a little bit more amiably and with like intention and thought, it really has been a great model. What drew you to becoming a therapist, like, and specifically becoming a therapist to work with men?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I would say, I mean, in hindsight, in retrospect, I think what drew me to kind of mental health was just my own need to heal and my own, so sort
Many
of
therapists.
fascinated by it. Yeah, just like a lot of therapists,
Yep.
it's like I didn't get into research, I got into me search,
Yep.
and went to school for it. And, I enjoy it. I have some of my strengths personally align well with the profession, but on some level, it resonated with me and who I was, and it was interesting to me. I actually I studied to be an archaeologist, and I was doing that for a while, and then it was kind of unfulfilling, and so I volunteered at a homeless shelter. I was out in
Mm.
Colorado at the time, and I just was just so intrigued by the complexity of, psychology and human behavior in that particular setting. And I would say I was kind of hooked then. I was like, this is something that I want to do. And then I just continued to, kind of follow what was interesting to me for me, and went back to school to be a therapist. And I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the other question. What got me to be a
Yeah,
therapist, or
what
why
drew
did I
you
pursue that?
specifically to working with men and like
Oh, yeah.
relationships? Yeah.
I knew there was another piece in there. Yeah, so that was kind of generally how I got into the field, my own personal interest and journey of healing. And then
Yeah.
so maybe a little backstory to just a little bit more context about me. So I was raised in an area of the Green Bay, Wisconsin, and in this particular like area, my family of origin, my lineage, and all of that. There
Mhm.
was a lot of alcoholism, and just like a lot of alcohol it was just part of the water that I swam in. And so I started drinking and using substances really young. 12 was when I started drinking, and I was pretty consistently using at 15. And so that was to deal with my own childhood hardships and then depression. And it kind of just became part of my life, part of what I did. And I was able to hold that together for many years. And then that builds like many things do. And then the pandemic and everything shifted. And, I had this sort of, like midlife crisis of really like falling apart. And that
Mm.
whole structure, the whole scaffolding that I had built my life on was no longer able to hold it all. And so part of that kind of sort of breaking open period for me was coming to realize that a part of my masculinity was arrested at a really young age. And there's good research on this. Terry Real talks a lot about this.
Yeah.
The primary wound for boys is that we get disconnected from our hearts, and for
Yeah.
women, it's disconnected from their voices. But that was true for me. And I was seeing how my inability to be vulnerable and be relational and be emotional was really harmful to everyone around me. which was painful. That was a
Yeah.
painful sort of aha, eye-opening kind of moment for me. And then I began looking around at all the men in my life and realized that so many of them were just like me and sort of unknowingly causing harm in their life, not because they're bad people, but because
Right.
they were sort of lacking this relational piece, this vulnerable piece, which is part of how we get socialized as boys. So that really
Exactly.
lit a fire under me around
Mm.
like trying to be a resource to for other men, realizing that like, well, I know what that's like. And then there's these other men that are sort of suffering from the same problem that I was suffering in. So that got me into the world of psychology. And even before that,
Yeah.
I worked at the Veterans Administration, which is primarily men. So, and then before that, I was in corrections, which is also primarily men. So just so happened that I had a lot of experience working with men, but that really became a big kind of targeted, focused shift for me right around the pandemic, so 2020, and that's when I left healthcare and started to pursue my own private practice and men's
Mhm.
psychology more specifically.
Yeah, it's interesting because the first 9 years of my career as a
Mm,
social worker, before I went off and got my master's, was working with young boys at risk at an alternative school for 9 years
mhm,
and working with their families and things like that. And what initially for me started as just a job, get a job out of college, turned into a passion. And really, I ended up staying there, 9, 10 years, thinking it was going to be, I'll put in my time and then I'll get a better job than this. And these boys were on the verge of, mostly boys, going into corrections if they
mm.
didn't transform some of their life. And I don't know if you saw recently, just finished the Netflix. I did a binge over the really cold weekend. Adolescence. It's
Oh
up for a
yeah,
couple awards. And
yeah,
there's that scene in the third episode where she's talking about, how did you learn how to be a man? How did you learn about masculinity? And that so hit me, of like how men have to shove down the emotion to fit in, to be accepted. And I remember my son, he's a hockey player, and he stopped playing violin. He was pretty good at it, and he
mm,
stopped playing in middle school. And it's one of his deepest regrets is he stopped it due to the peer pressure around him walking into the locker room with a violin for practice. And just, that handful of comments that are made, the shaming of like
mhm.
anything that's touchy feely or emotional or artistic or creative. And so would you say that you growing up had similar experiences and the men that you work with have similar experiences?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really tragic. It's really, it's just in the water. A fish doesn't know it's in water. It is just in everything that we do. And that's why it's so important to talk about it too, like beyond just sort of your more immediate, there's different levels. And of course, there's the relational one-to-one level, but like this kind of stuff happens on the playground, so you can be a really relational parent and you can really I mean you can have language that's flexible and responsive and all of that, but your boys are going to school and
Right.
it's this quit crying or I'll give you something to cry about, that kind of theme, that kind of like I mean it's changing to some degree thankfully, but like
Yeah.
it's still really baked in, like if you show any sign of like weakness, then you're sort of not man enough. And that's a really painful experience. And you could talk to any boy or any man and go back and they will have a handful of experiences that were really painful experiences that don't ever get seen because then they
Yeah.
can't talk about it. It's this really isolating experience of kind of being less than in a way,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and nowhere to go to kind of like process through that because the world around you is also reinforcing. I call this the masculine double bind. It's, the world is saying we need more men that are vulnerable and like, but then that's not actually what the experience is. And when, as soon as you show up to be vulnerable, you feel that backlash of
Yeah.
being less than. But that happens continuously, and that's, it's hard
Yeah.
to talk about it because it's like the thing that never happened, or you don't really see it because it's so subtle and it's just so consistent and it's so in
Hmm.
everything that we do. Movies, like, we just grow up with this narrative about being invulnerable, like all the Hollywood movies of Rambo and like all the stuff has this central kind of narrative around invulnerability, and it's repeated over and over and over again, and so we don't even see it.
Yeah, I love that you said that when, because my partner will say this all the time in relationship where I'm like, I want to hear what you're feeling. I want to hear your inner thoughts on that. And he's like, do you though? Because his
Yeah,
experience has been that when he
yeah,
has shared vulnerably or shared even in our relationship, because I'm socialized as being a woman and
in the
wanting
same
a man
water.
who's strong and like resilient, right? He's
Yes.
like, do you really want that though? Like, how vulnerable do you want it to be? Because um, will that vulnerability be accepted, seen, valued in the same
Yeah,
way that strongness is valued?
I love that you said that because I think it's an extra layer and it's such a challenging. When I started to open up around and explore and discuss the work that I was doing around masculinity,
Hmm.
and again, I call this the masculine double bind, but it's something that my wife said to me as well, is like, I was talking about vulnerability and she said something, I don't want a weak man. So it's like just what you're talking, just what your husband is saying. It's like, do you really though? Like,
Right?
you're asking me to be vulnerable, which is synonymous with weak. And so once we have that, that goes against that narrative about a man being strong and unshakable and, all of that. So it's a real tough thing because we're, as men, I think we are more and more being asked to be something different, but the sort of baked in element of that narrative really hasn't changed much. And so it doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel, I mean, even as a men's health advocate, I'm constantly having to stand up in the face of this sort of, what are you doing? Like what, like there's just this sort of
Yeah,
resistance about challenging the sort of status quo, even though it's killing our boys and men.
it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's interesting is what a piece of what drew me to my partner, though, was the
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability. He journals almost every day. He meets on the phone in the morning. He gets up way earlier than I do with a man that he met in recovery, and
Great.
they support each other and share gratitudes, which was just to me super hot. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, yes.
Yeah.
And he goes to, a weekly group sometimes.
Yeah.
And what was impressive with you is you do a weekly group and you have a phenomenal turnout. Like, I mean, I run
Mm-hmm.
women's groups and stuff, and I'm lucky if I get, 4 or 5 women to come. And you're talking like numbers that, you know, 10, 15 men showing up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what are you learning from the men that are showing up? Like what are they quietly struggling with that that we need to know other than the things we've already talked about?
Yeah. Just to tie it to that sort of this masculine double bind of like strong, not, like this sort of thing. I think the antidote for that is for men to connect with other men.
I
I
do
do
too.
think that there's an interest in, like, as you said, you do, there is something appealing because that's where a connection happens. Vulnerability is where a connection happens. So, you're, I'll just speak generally. I don't, but like women are longing for that connection, right? And
Yeah.
yet there's this,
Hmm.
like, it doesn't feel good to have that sort of shaky sort of vulnerability piece. And so I think when men connect with other men and they can be vulnerable with other men, then they can really learn, because again, it's like arrested development. If you don't spend a lot of
Yeah.
time, being with your feelings, for example, then when you're asked to be with your feelings, it's overwhelming. It's, hey, could you speak Japanese? I know you've never learned Japanese, but could you speak Japanese? And you just shut down because you don't have the capability.
Yeah.
So men sitting with other men, around these issues, I think, is crucial, vital, necessary in order to kind of show up in a stronger way. I like the word equanimity, like safely enduring. It doesn't mean you don't have feelings, but there's a steadiness to that feeling. And I think that comes only through being in relationship. And I think when men are with other men, they can, that mirrors something about themselves. And that just makes the learning a little deeper. So anyways, that's a little tangent. Yes, I mean, so yeah, I work with a nonprofit out of Chicago known as Men Living. Their vision is a world of healthy, intentional, connected men, and their mission is to create spaces for men to connect, heal, and thrive. So that's what I do here in the
Mhm.
Madison area once a month. We've been doing it for 15 months. But yeah, we had 144 guys go through the first year, and now we average 15 to 20
Wow.
guys a meeting, and there's just more to come. I think men are really hungry. What men are quietly suffering with is the artifact of this socialization. So the artifact of not being vulnerable. So invulnerability and independence, those are two sort of major tenets of how we get socialized. Can't be invulnerable and you can't be dependent. Well, good luck with relationships, because those are
Mm,
two really key pieces to a
right.
healthy, thriving relationship. So, what men come to me is just years of loneliness. I mean, you can be alone in a crowd, right? That idea. I mean, men are so
Exactly.
alone,
Yeah.
even if they've got 20 friends. I hear it all the time.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've got like guys have good like they have a text group of like 8 college buddies, but they don't actually connect. They just they communicate. And there's a difference between
Right.
communication and connection. You can talk about
Mhm.
sports or your work or whatever, but if you're not actually like sharing how that feels to live those things, like job loss or changes or challenges or family
Right.
issues, if you're not sharing on that level, you're not really actually connecting. So men are really starving for connection. And I think my teacher always says relationships are like food and water. We really need them. So men are thirsty.
Yeah. And if they don't get quenched, what happens then for men?
Yeah, I mean depression,
Yeah.
anxiety, withdrawal, avoidance, non-participation in families. And then, then the cycle continues in that generation, because then we model for our boys, what does it look
Yeah.
like to be a healthy man in a relationship? Oh, just a guy that's aloof and goes over here and watches sports and like never really shares what's going on in his inside, or doesn't offer guidance, or is really reactive, or like. And so that like sort of indifference,
Mm,
not kind of showing up, living life. I always say living life at the 40-yard line. We're not quite showing up to the 50, not participating. And of course, in more extreme examples, and the statistics are pretty clear on this, men kill themselves at a really high rate. They get to
yeah.
this
By suicide.
starvation, relational starvation point where, you know, it doesn't make sense to continue anymore. And these are guys that I see in my practice a lot.
Yeah. High
Hmm.
substance use.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That addiction, pornography, gambling. I think I saw a
Mm-hmm.
number of this new gambling, like something like 47% of men under the age of 30 are engaging in the sports betting. That's all over
Yeah.
the place now. It's just like,
Yeah.
just any way to kind of like put a little salve on this painful experience that I have of not being connected. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's another statistic that came out. There's a group called I can never say their name. Equimundo.
Equanimity.
No, it's Equimundo. I'll
Okay.
find it for you. I'll send it so you
Yeah.
have it.
Yeah.
But it's a gender studies group, and they did like a report on American men last year. And
Mm.
one of the statistics that just like hit me in the face was 2 out of 3 boys between the ages of 18 and 15, so young men, 18 and 25, 2 out of 3 young
Mm-hmm.
men don't believe that anyone really knows who they are.
Oh,
They're like totally alone. They're totally,
yeah.
and that tracks with what I see in young men these days. They're just really, and then the other thing that I think happens is what I make up. I don't know if this is true or not, but like then
Mm.
men gravitate towards like more harmful narratives, I mean, if they aren't being seen, and I think that's really what men are suffering. They don't, because they're not allowed to show themselves, and if you don't show yourself, you can't be
Right.
seen. So then men gravitate towards these other spaces, and this is the manosphere online. Young men are like gravitating towards these sort of figures that are not very relational and end up being kind of harmful. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's a challenging landscape for young men today, for sure.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all of that. And I would
Mm.
love the information that we could put about the study when you
Yeah.
have that a chance to do that. And so I know we're talking a lot in general, somewhat stereotypical terms, right? But in general, what do men wish women would know or hold space for?
Sorry, I was looking up that name, Equimundo. Let's see. Can you rephrase your question again? Sorry, I got
Yeah.
distracted.
What do men need women to know, or how can we do better and hold better space?
Mm. Well, that's a great question.
And even like how in your
mm,
relationship does your wife hold space for you where you're like,
mm,
thank you?
yeah. Yeah, I think one thing that I talk with a lot of couples about is, in any effective, which I don't love that word, but in any good communication, there's
Hmm.
one speaker and one listener. And so, like, being explicit about that and just going one way, I mean, I think oftentimes to be able to share in a space that is not reactive or problem solving or
Mm,
defensive, or you don't get into sort of like the content, but that can be um so my wife will often ask me like helped, heard, or hugged when I'm sharing something and getting like clear about like what would be, do you want my perspective on this, or do you just want me to like hear it? And
mm,
I find myself often just saying I just need to be heard. And
yeah.
so maybe that speaks to other men everywhere. I think for us to share something is a big risk. It's vulnerability. And then to have that sort of reacted to or not just allowed to just sort of be,
Hmm.
I think, just sort of like reinforces that idea like this isn't a safe space to actually share my heart. This isn't like into me see, this is what I'm
Yeah.
feeling. This is what I'm thinking about. And I don't have to have it all together.
Hmm.
And so just being seen.
Yeah, and I find that women, because we have an estrogen oriented brain and you have a testosterone oriented brain, women can be very verbose. And when we're telling a story, we can be like very wordy
Yeah.
and also interruptive. And it's when one thing I notice in therapy with couples is when I kind of give the space and say, wait, like I think he's still thinking about the question.
Hmm.
Let it sit for a little bit minute more. And when you can be silent and just let that whatever the question was or whatever the reaction was, it can be helpful.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think to answer the question depends a little bit on who's in the relationship. I mean, if you look at like
Yeah.
Terry Real's work, some people tend to be a little bit more walled off, and some people tend to be a little bit more boundaryless in their relational style. So, yeah, when I work with couples, I like to elevate that a little bit because, or like you said, and it's not always the case, but generally women, I think this has to do with how they get socialized. Women get socialized to want more out of relationships and to
Yes.
do better in relationships. So
We
there's
want
a
you to be our lover, our best friend, our soulmate, our co-parent.
exactly. And let's talk
What
about it. Let's
else?
talk
What
about
else
it.
can we
Yeah.
put in? Breadwinner?
Exactly.
All.
Yeah. So there, there's I think there's some of that I call this relational discrepancy, and sort of
Mm,
like men. So maybe if that's the case where women, let's just use talking, for example, but this could come in different ways. If women talk a lot more and men don't say a lot, I see this a lot, right? He doesn't say
yeah.
anything. And so to like dial that back, like for women to talk less and then men, of course, need to talk more, and so like trying to
Yes.
find in your relationship, if you if you could identify this to your listeners, but if you could identify just the difference between talking, right? That would be, and then to kind of change if you're talking a lot, talk a little less, and then encourage your partner to talk a little bit more. And those things are related, right? And so I don't know if that answers your question, but those are
Yeah, no, it
just some
does.
thoughts
Yeah,
around
and I
that.
think it's helpful for listeners, viewers that are out there to be reflective of how am I listening and how am I sharing? You know,
Hmm.
which parts do I need to modify a little bit more to be more relational? Um, what gives you hope right now as we kind of are wrapping up our time together about
Hmm.
men and relationships?
Well, I think there's just more consciousness. I mean, that
There is,
probably
yeah.
gives me the hope. There's men of my generation. You can kind of see this sort of like, I haven't seen a chart, but if there was one, it would be like the younger the generation, the more relational, the more willing, vulnerable, open, and my generation. And so I see there's a lot of men in my generation. So I'm 47,
Hmm.
that are beginning to take some ownership, take responsibility, show up in men's spaces.
Yeah.
Men's organizations are growing, which is encouraging to do it differently, and to take responsibility for that. It's not your fault, but it's your responsibility if you choose
Hmm.
that. So that the work that I'm doing with men every day, I see really good, open-hearted, strong men in my practice, and so that gives me hope.
Hmm.
And then, of course, like the younger generation, I've got a 14-year-old at home, and I remember thinking, man, I'm as emotionally as developed as my 14-year-old, which is really encouraging. It's sort of
Yeah.
like I'm like, wow, like he can really run relational circles around me in a lot of ways. So yeah, so I think that there's the raising of consciousness and the conversations that we're having like
Mhm.
this about a layered kind of nuanced sort of dynamic, that one that's complicated. It's not an easy social media post or black and white kind of thing, but it's a both and conversation. And I think there's more people having those conversations.
Yeah, and I love what you said about it doesn't matter who's the fault, that there's just accountability if it's happening. And the hope I have for men and relationships in general is just even though we were socialized or maybe raised in certain ways, it doesn't mean it has to be our future self, and
Hmm.
that we can learn these skills, learn how
Hmm.
to learn how to show up, how to be in partnership, how to be vulnerable, and how to hold space for that vulnerability. So that's what gives me hope. And
Hmm.
I love that you came on today. We could probably do five more episodes and still not
Yeah.
even get to the depth of what this work is and what you're doing for men. How would people get a hold of you if they want to get in touch with you and work with you? And I definitely will put your website aligned on purpose
Yeah.
out of the
Yeah.
Sun Prairie, Greater Madison area. But how would people get a hold of you and connect with you?
Yeah, that would be my website. That's probably the best way to go. I don't know if you would have my website has my contact information in terms
Yep.
of telephone and my email, so that would be great. And even if there's some men listening out there that would be interested more in men living, it's menliving.org is a organization. They have meetings for men every day, virtual meetings every day, and then I have my
All over the
all over
country.
the country. Yeah, in the world, really. We have a
Okay.
facilitator in Dublin and people that are continuing to. So it's growing, but I don't think I have a link to that on the website. But
I'll find a
menliving.org.
link and I'll put it in the show notes also
Okay,
for listeners. So yeah.
that would be it. Just reach out. Yeah, I'm happy to point people in the right direction too, help them find where they need to be. So
Yeah.
thank you so
Well,
much. I
yeah,
appreciate the
thank you
time
so
and the
much. And
conversation.
thank you. Thank you for being willing to come on and have the conversation with me. And let's keep supporting each other in the work that we're doing. So
Be
thanks.
relational. I love it.
Be
All right.
relational. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Christy.
Thanks.